I have opened a great many doors in my career at the palace at Harrowgate, but I have never forgotten the particular weight of the one I closed that night, because on the other side of it was a sealed letter I had no business holding, and a king who was about to ask me questions I did not yet know how to answer honestly. My name is Sergeant Halden Rourke, and for 9 years I have served on the household detail at Harrowgate in the kingdom of Eldermore. Most of that service has been unremarkable in the way good service usually is: long nights at gates that nothing passes through, long days at doors that nothing troubles. But there was one week. During the spring, the Ashenfeld Union delegation came to renegotiate the river trade accords, when a single letter, carried the wrong way by the wrong hand, nearly convinced a king that his own son was hiding something terrible from him. I want to tell you about that week, because I was the guard who stopped the letter, and because I was, for the better part of 2 days, the only man in the palace who knew exactly how much trouble a piece of folded paper could cause when it left the building through the wrong door. It began at the postern gate, the narrow servants' gate on the western wall that the household staff use for supply runs and errands too small to bother the main gatehouse with. I had drawn that post for the fortnight, which was not, under ordinary circumstances, a demanding assignment. But these were not ordinary circumstances. The Ashenfeld delegation had arrived 4 days earlier for a summit that everyone from the king down to the boot boys understood to be tense. The river accords touched fishing rights that half of Eldermore's coastal towns depended on, and Deputy Chancellor Roderick Vane's people had a reputation, deserved or not, for driving hard bargains and holding grudges when they lost them. Captain Osric Vale had tightened every protocol in the house for the duration of the visit, and one of those tightened protocols concerned exactly the kind of thing that happened to me at 10:30 that night. Nolan Fitch came through the kitchen yard with a hand cart, the way he did most evenings when the household needed something from the village that couldn't wait for the morning wagon: a forgotten spice, a broken harness buckle, medicine for a sick horse. Nolan was somewhere past 60 by then, a groundskeeper who had worked the estate longer than I had been alive, and I had waved him through that gate 1,000 times without a second thought. I very nearly waved him through that night too. But the standing order for the duration of the summit was plain and left no room for a guard's own judgment about who could be trusted. Every person and every parcel leaving the grounds outside the formal courier log was to be stopped, noted, and if warranted, inspected, no exceptions, regardless of how well the guard on duty knew the person carrying it. "Evening, Nolan," I said. "What are you carrying tonight?" "Nothing but a list for the apothecary and my own poor conscience," he said, which was the sort of thing Nolan always said, and under any other week I would have laughed and let him through. But I had my orders, and I had learned a long time ago that the weeks you most want to skip a formality are exactly the weeks you cannot afford to. "Anything else?" I asked. "Letters, parcels, anything you're carrying for someone else." He hesitated. It was a small hesitation, no more than half a breath, but I had stood in enough doorways over 9 years to know the shape of a man deciding whether to tell you the truth, and I watched it cross his face plainly before he reached into his coat and drew out a sealed letter, addressed in a hand I recognized immediately, because I had seen it on 100 official documents over the years. It read simply, "Her Royal Highness Princess Adela," no seal of the household post. No entry in the courier log I had watched him not stop to make. "His Highness the Crown Prince asked me to carry it," Nolan said, and there was nothing evasive in how he said it, only the plain discomfort of a man who suddenly understood, watching my face, that he had just handed something over that was about to become more complicated than a spice list. Said it needed to go tonight, and that I was headed that way regardless, so there was no sense troubling anyone else with it. I want to be honest about what went through my mind in that moment, because it matters to everything that came after. I did not think, even for a second, that Nolan Fitch was smuggling anything sinister out of Harrowgate on behalf of a crown prince who had known him his whole life. What I thought was narrower and more procedural than that. This is an item leaving the grounds, during a heightened security posture, outside the logged channel, and my orders on that point admit no exceptions for how trustworthy the carrier happens to be. I was not accusing Rowan of anything. I was following a rule that existed precisely so that no single guard ever had to make that judgment call alone, in the dark, at a side gate, based on nothing but how long he'd known a face. "I'm going to need to hold that Nalin," I said, "and log it and get word to the captain. It isn't a reflection on you or on His Highness. It's the standing order for the duration of the summit, and it applies to everyone, including people I've known as long as I've known you." He gave it over without argument, though I could see it troubled him, and I sent him on his way with an apology and a promise that I'd see the letter reached its destination as soon as the matter was properly cleared, one way or another. Then I did exactly what 9 years of training told me to do. I logged the item, sealed it in an evidence sleeve without opening it, and sent word up the chain that an unlogged piece of correspondence addressed to Princess Adela had been intercepted leaving the grounds by an unofficial carrier during the security period, and that I was holding it pending instruction. I did not expect that message to reach the king himself within the hour. I have thought about that a great deal since, about how a report can travel so much faster and so much further than the person who wrote it ever intends, simply because of who it happens to be about. Captain Vale came to the gatehouse himself a little after 11, took the sealed letter from me, and read my log entry twice before he said anything at all. "You did exactly right," he told me, which eased a knot I hadn't fully noticed forming in my chest. "But I need to take this to Master Aldridge tonight, not in the morning. Given who sent it, and given the week we're in, this isn't something that waits for the next duty shift to sort out." Master Corvin Aldridge was the king's private secretary, a precise, careful man who had held the post for a dozen years and had never, in my experience, done anything by half measures. He received the captain in his office at nearly midnight, still in his working clothes, because the summit had every senior officer in the household working past reasonable hours that week. I was not in the room for what was said between them, but I learned enough of it afterward, from the captain himself, to piece together how quickly a simple, procedural interception became something else entirely. Aldridge's objection was not to the letter's existence. Members of the royal family wrote to one another constantly, and nobody thought twice about it. His objection was to the manner of it, a personal letter from the crown prince to his aunt, sent by an unofficial hand, outside the log, on the exact night that every unusual movement in and out of Harrowgate was supposed to be accounted for without exception. Taken on its own, in an ordinary week, it would have meant nothing at all. Taken in the middle of a tense trade summit, with foreign delegates housed under the same roof and every corridor thick with the particular anxiety that accompanies difficult diplomacy, it meant, to a careful man like Aldridge, that something was being kept off the record on purpose, by someone with every reason to know better. "I don't like carrying you news at this hour," Aldridge told the king, when he was shown in not long after, "but I would like it even less to have sat on this until morning and be asked why I didn't come sooner." He laid out the plain facts, the hour, the unlogged carrier, the address, the seal unbroken and waiting on his desk, and said no more than that, because he did not, in fact, know any more than that. I was told afterward, by more than one person who was in the room, that King Alaric went very still when he heard it, the particular stillness of a man working hard not to let his face show the full weight of what he was thinking. He had spent 4 days managing a summit that could reshape the livelihoods of half his coastal towns, 4 days of careful language and carefully controlled tempers, with a delegation that missed no opportunity to test where the crown's patience ended. And now, at midnight on the 4th of those days, he was being told that his own son was sending his sister a letter through a side gate, off the books, in the one week when every eye in the palace was supposed to be on exactly that kind of movement. I do not think it is hard to understand why that frightened him. A father who loves his children does not first imagine the kindest explanation for a locked door. He imagines the worst one, because the worst one is the one that would hurt the people he loves, and love makes a poor judge of probability. He told me himself, much later, what had gone through his mind in that first quarter hour, that Rowan and Adela were quietly coordinating some approach to the Ashenfeld delegation behind his back, perhaps out of some disagreement over how the negotiations should be run, or that there was trouble between Rowan and Adela that neither of them had told him about, some rift he'd been too consumed by the summit to notice forming. Or, worse than either, that something had happened to one of them that they were keeping from him on purpose because they judged him too burdened that week to bear it. None of those thoughts were reasonable, exactly. All of them were entirely human, in a father who had already, once in his life, learned what it cost to be told too late that something serious was wrong. "Send for my son," he said, "now whatever hour it is." I was summoned back to the captain's office shortly after 1 in the morning, to give my own account directly, because Aldridge had rightly pointed out that a report retold twice loses precision, that a report given once does not. I stood in front of King Alaric for the first time that week under circumstances I had never expected and told him, in the plain, sequential order I had been trained to use, exactly what had happened at the postern gate, Null and Fitch, the handcart, the hesitation, the letter, the standing order, nothing more and nothing less. "You did not open it," the king said. "It was not quite a question." "No, your majesty. Sealed correspondence between members of the royal family is not opened on a guard's own authority under any circumstance I am aware of. I logged it, secured it, and reported it up the chain, exactly as the standing order requires." He nodded slowly, and I saw something in his face that I recognized, because I had felt its shape myself more than once in 9 years of standing near people I could not fully protect from their own fear. He was not angry with me. He was afraid, and looking for somewhere to put that fear that wasn't simply sitting still and waiting. Crown Prince Rowan arrived not long after, still dressed for the day though it was well past 1 in the morning. And I want to say plainly that I have rarely seen a man look more caught out by something he had never imagined would grow this large. He had, I think, pictured Null and Fitch delivering a letter to his aunt some time before breakfast, with no one the wiser, and instead he walked into his father's private study to find the king, the captain of the guard, and the king's private secretary all waiting on him at 1 in the morning, with a sealed letter sitting on the desk between them like evidence at a tribunal. "Sit down," the king said, and there was nothing harsh in his voice, only a tightness that told everyone in the room how much effort it was costing him to keep it level. "I am told you sent your aunt a letter tonight, by a groundskeeper, outside the post. On the one night in 4 years I have asked this household to account for every unlogged thing that leaves it. I would like you to tell me why. And I would like you to tell me now, because I have spent the last hour imagining a great many reasons, and none of the ones I have imagined have let me sleep." Rowan looked at the letter on the desk for a long moment before he answered, and when he did, his voice had none of the evasiveness I think his father had been dreading, only a kind of tired embarrassment. "It isn't what you're afraid it is," he said. "I promise you that first before anything else. It has nothing to do with the delegation, nothing to do with Adela and me disagreeing about anything, and nothing to do with either of us keeping trouble from you. I used Nolan because he was already going that way tonight and I didn't want to wait for the morning post, and I didn't send it through the proper channel because I would have had to explain the contents to whoever logs it, and I wasn't ready to explain them to anyone yet. That's the whole of my crime, father. Poor timing and worse judgment about how much explaining paperwork requires." "Then explain them to me," the king said. "Now. I would rather hear it plainly from you than keep guessing." I watched Rowan hesitate, and I understood, watching him, that his hesitation was not the hesitation of a man deciding what to hide, but of a man realizing that the thing he had been quietly protecting for weeks was about to be handled roughly by exactly the kind of urgent, frightened scrutiny he had gone to some trouble to avoid. "It concerns Effie Larkspur," he said finally. "I don't know if that name means anything to you anymore. It's been a long time." I saw the king's face change before Rowan finished the sentence, and I understood, watching it, that the name meant a very great deal indeed. "Effie Larkspur was my mother's companion," Rowan said, more gently now, watching his father's face. "Isolde's. She was there from before I can remember anything at all. She used to sit with me and Alara in the nursery when Mother was called away. She taught us both to swim. She was the one who sat up with me the week after Mother died, when I wouldn't sleep in my own room. I've written to her every few months for years, quietly, nothing anyone needed to know about, because it never seemed like anyone's business but mine. Adela knows her too, knows her well actually, better than I realized until recently, because it turns out Adela has been writing to her separately for years, on her own, without either of us knowing the other was doing it. She's ill," he went on. "Her heart, the doctors at Willowmere tell us, though she'd never say so herself in a letter. I only found out because Adela's been in closer contact with the home than I have, and she wrote to tell me the doctors don't think it wise for Effie to travel far, or to wait too long for whatever visiting she means to do. This week is the anniversary of Mother's death, Father. You know that better than anyone." And Effie asked, in her last letter to Adela, whether there was any chance at all of seeing me again before he stopped, and did not finish that sentence, and did not need to. "Adela and I have spent the last 3 weeks arranging to bring her here quietly, without troubling you with the logistics of it in the middle of a summit that's already taking everything you have to give it." That was the whole of what was in that letter tonight: travel arrangements, dates, a photograph of the 3 of us I wanted Adela to have a copy of before I sent the original back to Effie, because it's the only one Effie has left of that summer, and I didn't want it lost in the post. I didn't send it through the log because I didn't want to sit down with a clerk at midnight and explain who Effie Larkspur is, and why an old woman's failing heart needed to move faster than the ordinary channels. I wanted it handled quietly and kindly, and I am sorry it frightened you instead. The room was very quiet after that. I watched the king's face move through something I have rarely seen a monarch allow a room full of people to watch. Not composure slipping, exactly, but composure choosing, deliberately, to step aside for something more honest underneath it. "Master Aldridge," the king said, when he trusted his voice again, "I would like the letter opened, with my son's permission, not because I doubt a word he has just told me, but because I think, after the fright I have given this household tonight, the least I owe everyone in this room is proof rather than my own relief taken on faith." Rowan nodded, and Aldridge broke the seal himself, and read it aloud plainly, without embellishment: travel dates for a quiet visit to Willowmere the following week. A note to Adela about arranging a private room away from the delegation's wing so Effie would not be troubled by strangers. And folded inside, a small, worn photograph of a woman in her middle years with a laughing boy and a solemn-eyed little girl on either side of her. And on the back, in a hand gone soft with age, 3 words: "My dear children." "That is not the whole of my proof if you want more of it," Rowan said quietly, once the letter had been read. "Adela has every letter Effie sent her for the last 2 years, and the home's own doctor has written to us twice about her condition, and Nolan's carried letters for me to Effie before this, more than once, though never one this urgent. I didn't think to bring any of it tonight because I never imagined I'd need to prove I loved my own mother's oldest friend enough to want to see her one more time. I only wanted it done quietly and kindly, and I made a poor job of the quietly part." Princess Adela arrived within the hour, roused from her own rooms by a messenger, and confirmed every part of it in her own words before anyone had thought to ask her to. The years of separate letters neither she nor Rowan had known the other was writing, the doctor's warnings, the 3 weeks of careful, private arranging that she had genuinely believed would spare her brother one more thing to carry that week, rather than add to what he was already carrying. She had brought, without being asked, the folder of correspondence with Willowmere's staff, dated and signed, because she said she had learned long ago that a family's good intentions are worth more to the people who doubt them when they come with paper attached. "We should have told you from the start," she said to her brother, "and there was nothing performed in it, only plain regret. I think we both assumed, separately, that telling you meant giving you one more thing to manage in a week already too full of things to manage, and we were wrong to decide that for you instead of simply asking." King Alaric sat with the photograph in his hands for a long moment before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice had none of the tightness it carried an hour earlier. "I have spent tonight afraid that my son was hiding a rift from me, or a danger, or some trouble he thought I could not bear to hear," he said. "I find instead that he was hiding a kindness, because he thought I had enough to bear already without it. I do not know which mistake to correct first, the frightened one I made tonight, or the well-meant one the two of you have apparently been making for 3 weeks. He looked at Rowan, and something eased fully in his face for the first time since I had walked into that study. "You will not go to Willowmere without me." I loved that woman's steadiness more than I think either of you ever knew, in the year after your mother died, and I will not be kept from thanking her simply because you both decided, kindly and wrongly, that I had no room left in that week for anything but treaties. I want to tell you what happened to me in the middle of all this, because it is a small thing, but it has stayed with me. Somewhere in that last hour, with the photograph passing from hand to hand and Adela's folder of letters open on the desk, Captain Vale caught my eye across the room and gave me a short nod, the kind that meant, without needing words, that I had done exactly what the post required of me, and that nothing about what followed was mine to carry as fault. I was grateful for it, because some part of me had spent the whole of that long night quietly afraid that I had been the one who turned an old man's kindness for an old woman into a midnight interrogation in front of the king. "Sergeant," the king said, before I was dismissed, "I understand you stopped a man you have known for years, on a night when it would have been easier to wave him through, because a standing order asked it of you regardless of how well you knew his face." "Yes, your majesty." "That is precisely what I ask of every guard in this house, and precisely what I got tonight, and I will not have anyone in this room think, tomorrow or any day after, that the fright it gave me was your doing rather than my own. You did your duty exactly as it should be done. The rest of tonight is on the 3 of us who kept a kindness too quiet for our own good." The visit to Willowmere happened the following week, once the summit had concluded, favorably, as it turned out, though that is a different story than the one I am telling. I was not present for it myself, but Rowan told me some time afterward that his father had sat with Effie Larkspur for the better part of an afternoon, and that at some point in that visit the king had produced from his own coat a second photograph he had kept for years without either of his children knowing it existed. The same summer, a different angle, Isolde laughing at something just out of frame, and Effie beside her. Both of them, young in a way none of us who came later had ever seen them. I think about that letter sometimes, when I am posted at a gate on a quiet night and nothing is passing through it. I think about how close a genuine kindness came to being read as its opposite, simply because it moved through the world the wrong way at the wrong hour, and how much of my work, in the end, has less to do with danger than with the slow, careful business of letting the truth catch up to a fear that outran it. I do not regret stopping Nolan Fitch that night. I would do it again, gate for gate, exactly the same way. But I have never been more glad, in 9 years of standing at doorways, to be wrong about what I thought I might be holding.